This is the building at 432 Park Avenue. Expected to be the pinnacle of modern luxury, its developers called it the building of the 21st century. It sold for $2.9 billion. Today, the very billionaires who paid for that promise are suing those who built it for 1,500 flaws that no one ever told them about. How does a tower this thin stay standing in the wind at all? What happens inside a $100 million apartment when the whole building starts to move? If the risks were already documented, why did buyers keep paying record prices anyway? And when a $100 million apartment starts falling apart, who is actually the one held responsible for it?
The Middle Finger Building is arguably the most hated building in New York City, the trash can building, because it was modeled off a trash can.
432 Park Avenue was inspired by a trash can.
To understand 432 Park Avenue is to understand the moment that produced it. In 2013, Manhattan's luxury market wasn't just healthy, it was flooded with global capital. Money from mainland China and other international markets was entering New York real estate at a scale the city had rarely seen. Hedge funds were looking for somewhere more glamorous than a treasury bond to park their money. A Manhattan address had become both an investment and a form of identity for buyers who might spend little time actually living there. The only question that seemed to matter was no longer what people needed to live well.
Like a pencil, and there's so many problems with it. Building literally sways during heavy storms. Most of the tenants comprise of overseas billionaires. As an investment, as a money laundering opportunity.
It was how high a residential building could go before something finally stopped it. The answer was a tower only about 93 feet wide and 1,396 feet tall, a slenderness ratio of roughly 15:1, thin enough that engineers had to reconsider how wind would behave around it before they could even calculate how to keep its movement within safe limits. The man behind that number was Harry McClough, one of the most aggressive and consequential developers in New York over the past 50 years. He built it from a design by Raphael Viñoly, an architect known for work that was as often controversial as it was celebrated. Viñoly's starting point was a metal wastebasket from 1905, its sides punched with a grid of holes. He simply stretched that shape to 1,396 feet and cast it in white concrete. Prices started around $7 million for lower floor units, and the highest penthouse eventually sold for about $87.7 million, among the most expensive residential sales in New York at the time. The buyers who lined up for its 104 residences were connected to sovereign wealth hedge funds and technology fortunes, many purchasing through shell companies that made their identities difficult to trace publicly. For many of them, this wasn't a place to live. It was a box for storing wealth at altitude. Buyers signed contracts and wired tens of millions of dollars before the tower was even finished. That was the plan. Here's what actually happened. How 432 Park Avenue controls wind sway. Most supertalls solve wind the same way. They confuse it. The Burj Khalifa changes shape as it rises. The Shanghai Tower twists through its height, breaking up the airflow around it. 432 Park does almost none of that. It's a rigid square, straight up with no setbacks, no curves, nothing to break the wind against but the building itself. When wind hits a flat surface this tall, it doesn't just push. Air splits around the corners and peels off in alternating vortices, pulling the tower side to side like a hand rocking a cradle. To control that, engineers installed two tuned mass dampers near the top steel counterweights, weighing roughly 660 tons, each more than 1,300 tons total, swinging in the opposite direction of the sway. They also left several floors completely open, letting wind pass straight through, instead of pushing against solid concrete. What wasn't in the brochure that open mechanical space generally doesn't count against a building's zoning floor limit, which meant the occupied floors could be pushed higher without adding to the counted square footage. The tower ended up so tall, it triggered a mandatory aviation safety review by the Federal Aviation Administration before construction could even proceed. Getting the tower to stand up was only half the problem. When the building systems broke down, None of that made the building motionless, it just kept the movement inside engineering limits. Metal under repeated stress behaves the same, whether it's a paperclip or a pipe joint. Bend it enough times and it eventually gives. Everything installed inside still had to accommodate some Sway 11 elevator cars, long vertical plumbing lines, facade connections, windows, interior walls. In November 2018, a high-pressure water line failed around the 60th floor and sent water pouring into the elevator shafts. Days later, another line failed near the 74th. The two incidents reportedly triggered close to $10 million in insurance payouts, and the building's overall insurance costs rose roughly 300% within 2 years. There's no public engineering finding that directly blames the tower's sway for those specific pipe failures. But elevator systems in supertalls are built to slow or stop once wind speeds cross a safety threshold. And residents at 432 Park have reported exactly that delays malfunctions and being trapped inside stalled cars. The structure survived. What it was like to live inside it was a different question.
The fear that we have is that these buildings will become zombie towers. We want these buildings to be occupied by people who do become part of the community, not empty space where foreign investors park their money.
Serena Abramovich and her husband, both retired business owners, were among the earliest buyers at 432 Park Avenue. They agreed to pay roughly $17 million for an apartment high above Manhattan. While the tower was still under construction and before the purchase had even closed, the apartment was still surrounded by steel plates and plywood, but it was already the home they had committed millions of dollars to buying. For residents, the first warning sign was not a lawsuit, it was the sound. On windy nights, a deep resonant groaning reportedly traveled through the walls. Some residents compared the experience to being inside a ship at sea. Instead, residents said the building itself was creating the disturbance. Richard Ressler, a co-founder of CIM Group who also owns an apartment in the tower, reportedly acknowledged that the noise could make sleeping difficult. That was only the beginning. A pipe later failed above her apartment, sending water through the ceiling for hours and causing an estimated $500,000 in damage. As tensions inside the building grew, residents became divided. Some wanted to sue the developers, others wanted the disputes kept private. Abramovich later summarized the atmosphere bluntly: "Everybody hates each other here." In her view, the tower's polished image had become a kind of camouflage, hiding the problems behind its luxury exterior. The problems could no longer be contained behind closed doors. By September 2021, residents' patience had run out.
2 lawsuits against the developers and other members of the design team claiming that the building is not what they had signed up for.
That month, the condo board filed a $125 million lawsuit alleging more than 1,500 defects across the building's structural, mechanical, electrical, and life safety systems. The same noise, flooding, and stranded elevators residents had described were now written into a formal legal complaint. The developers denied the allegations, calling them vastly exaggerated. The people who built and sold the apartments had already been paid. The people living with the alleged problems were now facing the cost of fixing them. The first lawsuit was never settled and remains ongoing. Estimates for the facade repairs alone have ranged from $100 million to $160 million, averaged across the building. That equals roughly $1 million to $1.5 million per apartment, though actual assessments could vary. Resale records also show several units selling well below their original purchase prices. Those losses were carried by owners who had already paid full price for the promise. That should have ended the story. It didn't. In April 2025, the board filed a second suit seeking at least $165 million this time, alleging fraud, not just defective construction. Lawyers for the board said they reviewed 7 million pages of internal documents and conducted around 100 days of depositions to reconstruct what the architects, engineers, and developers had known. According to the complaint, concerns about the exposed concrete facade were raised as early as 2012, 3 years before the tower opened. Engineers recommended a protective coating to reduce water penetration through the concrete. Macklowe rejected it because it would change the pure white finish he wanted and proposed a clear silicone sealant, instead similar to one used on a yacht. Like most major New York developments, 432 Park was built through a network of legal entities that separated the individual developers from the condominium itself, making personal liability harder to establish. The board alleges buyers kept signing contracts and closing on apartments without ever being told about the warnings. The facade has since developed more than 1,800 cracks, and in some places the board says water has reached the steel reinforcement underneath. These remain allegations, and the defendants deny wrongdoing, but one choice sits at the center of all of it. He allegedly chose color over a coating that could stop this. $165 million and counting. And it's happening again right now. This was never just one disputed construction choice. It describes a system that rewarded speed and appearance over safety, and to this day nobody who made that decision has been asked to personally justify it. Should Macklowe's CIM Group and the other defendants be forced to pay for damage the lawsuits say they knew about and hid? Or did buyers chasing one of the most expensive addresses in America accept the risk that comes with an experimental supertall? The comments are open. Walk a few blocks down 57th Street and the same basic model shows up again. 111 West 57th Street has a slenderness ratio of roughly 24:1. Even more extreme than 432 Park's. Central Park Tower, the tallest primarily residential building in the world, has also reportedly sold more slowly and at deeper discounts than its developers projected. 3 towers, 3 enormous financial bets, 3 versions of the same promise that height itself could be sold as luxury before anyone fully understood what living inside it would actually be like. The same math that built 432 Park is already being repeated somewhere else in this city. You just may not know which one yet. The project you just watched took years to fail publicly. The next one on this channel took longer and costs more. Subscribe, because by the time it makes the news, it's already too late. Comments are open. Name your city.